Welcome to What to Watch Wednesdays, hosted by someone's favorite film buff, Nathan. I love movies and I want to share that with you. From old originals to cult classics and foreign favorites, along with straight up drivel, WWW is your place for all things movies. Stick around and we'll leave you with a movie to watch over the weekend with your family or that special someone. So sit back, relax, and enjoy the show. 88.1 The Burg, your Music Central. Welcome to What to Watch Wednesdays. My name is Nathan. I'll be your host for tonight, and we are going to be talking about some movies because I call it What to Watch Wednesdays, and it wouldn't make sense to make the show about video games. It's not what to play, it's what to watch. At any rate, to kind of introduce our movies tonight, I'd like to kind of throw out a general concept that I think a lot of us are familiar with. That being quality over quantity. Or quantity over quality. It depends on how you're looking at things, but it's definitely the interrelation between the words quality and quantity that tends to be brought up a lot of the time. People tend to use it in everyday speech, or they tend to at least keep it as a background philosophy for their lives, at least in certain degrees. One of those is definitely movie making. A lot of film directors are known for either their quality of movies or their quantity of movies, or sometimes both. They tend to have a very large portfolio of well-directed movies that really stand out. People like Spielberg and Scorsese and Tarantino have a lot of movies to their name, and a lot of those movies are considered good. Some directors, however, tend to also kind of value the quality instead of the quantity. They don't have a massive portfolio. They have like maybe less than 5 or somewhere around that range of movies that people hear about, or maybe they watch them, and they're definitely good and people rate them pretty high, but they're not necessarily churning out a lot year after year after year. And there are some people that I think of when I hear a concept like that. I think of Martin McDonough, I don't know how to pronounce his last name, excuse me for that, Jeff Nichols, and Jeremy Saulnier. But those are 3 people that you've probably never heard of before. So instead, I'd like to actually highlight somebody that most people have definitely heard of, or at least heard of his movies, that being Damien Chazelle. Because people know who he is. And if you don't, have you heard of the movies La La Land or Whiplash? Because those are the first 2 movies we're talking about tonight. Trust me, you've heard of those 2 movies, even if you've never heard the name Damien Chazelle before. We'll also be talking about his most recent movie, that being Babylon from 2022. I'm excited to talk about that one, but we can't necessarily jump into the movie reviews without playing some music first. So stick around. 88.1 The Burg, your Music Central. Welcome back to What to Watch Wednesdays. And for our first movie on the watch list tonight, we will be taking a look at La La Land from 2016, available to rent now. One of the quick things about this movie is that I have to like over enunciate the L's because otherwise it just sounds like La La Land, and it's just like, is it La La Land or La La Land? The 3 L's just kind of makes it a bit of a tongue twister. But at any rate, let's jump into the plot of this movie for those of you who aren't familiar with it. So this movie follows a musician by the name of Sebastian and an actress, or an aspiring actress, by the name of Mia. They end up falling in love in LA, or in the Hollywood area, and they end up kind of bonding through their mutual love of their passion and wanting to follow their dreams and be in the stars, the city of stars, that being LA, Hollywood, and it's all so incredibly sappy. At least it would have been. It definitely would have been not very good. And I should also mention, before we get too further in, that keep in mind this is also a musical, so again, it's setting itself up to be really, really sappy. But there is one thing that I will always admit about myself, which is that I'm a sucker for good casting. I love a good cast. I love when 2 actors can work together and make something good. I don't care what the premise is. If the premise works, it does have to work. That's for sure. What I mean more so is what the premise itself kind of represents, or what it stands for. It could be something crazy. As long as it works as a story, it's completely fine. The actors are what bring it to life. And with La La Land specifically, I don't love the premise. I love the 2 main actors, that being Ryan Gosling playing the musician Sebastian, and Emma Whoa, I almost said Emma Stone when it's Emma Stone playing Mia, the aspiring actress. They've been well known for their roles in this movie, but I think I can fully understand why. I totally understand exactly why people celebrate Gosling and Stone's chemistry together. It's definitely there. It's definitely a perfect combination, a 1 in a billion match, and it just works. It made me say, honestly, I enjoyed watching that movie, but I just remember those two being the reason for it, not exactly the overall premise of the story. Because I could use the word sappy over and over again, but it feels way too caught up in its own glitz and glamour for its own good. The idea of Hollywood being the city of stars and the place where you can find your dreams and live out your life as a constant figure in people's lives, as some massive celebrity, and all you have to do is make it big and for once in your life. And it's just like, that's such a stupid idea. I've been to LA before. Nobody manages to do it. The people who do are in the 1% of people who got lucky, okay? And who look great and probably went through surgery to look great. Most of the people in LA have to deal with nightmarish traffic, boiling heat, and never being able to make enough of themselves because they have to work 3 jobs in order to keep a house. That's not even an exaggeration. I don't understand the overall, just the overall appraisal of LA and Hollywood as being some awesome place when I have been there, and it is definitely a fun place to visit, but I would lose my mind if I actually lived there. I loved going there on a vacation, but I can't live there. And so it just annoys me whenever I see it brought up as this great thing, except during like the 70s when it's played off as a joke in something like Blazing Saddles where they completely make fun of it. I could go on, and it's not specifically just La La Land's fault, but it is a significant aspect of La La Land. In fact, it's part of the story, which is part of the reason I ragged on it for so long, because it's about a musician and an aspiring actress falling in love in LA, and they're both trying to be good. They're both trying to get famous for being a singer and an actress. That is so heavily reliant on the overall idea of LA being something awesome. It's called La La Land. The first 2 words in the title are LA, LA, okay? I can complain about it. It may not be perfectly valid and it's nitpicky and annoying, but I think it's really funny to constantly go off on it, so I will keep doing that until I get bored, which is right now. Let's switch to the actual, more so content of the movie. One of the things I really like about La La Land is, unlike other musicals that I have seen before, and keep in mind, I'm not a massive musical fan. Like, I don't watch a lot of Broadway plays. I'm not like some guy who knows all the lines to his favorite song or Broadway play or something like that. But I can at least appreciate a good musical, one that doesn't take itself uber seriously just because it has to put the songs in there and kind of work around that and work around the fact that the characters are going to stop at some point and just start singing. I can appreciate a musical that doesn't take itself too seriously. La La Land takes itself the right amount of serious, wherein it is definitely about being kind of wild and out there, and sometimes it just kind of goes straight into song. It just kind of gives itself some more allowances to be a bit goofy and on the side of, hey, we're gonna do a song now. But, and one of the things I think I've heard as a genuine praise of this movie, and something I fully agree with, is that rather than being about the songs itself and constantly having to set them up, there's definitely a style of making the story about the song. About the story takes itself as the main focus point, and the songs kind of build around it. It's a weird way to describe it perfectly. What I'm basically trying to say is that rather than constantly trying to push their story forward through the music, it's about the story that happens in between each musical number. Like the famous tap dancing scene from this movie that is always on the posters and shows Gosling and Emma Stone tap dancing together. It's not necessarily about the story moving forward. It's just about them kind of meandering about in the middle of the night. And then right after that is when we get the actual character development and the real interactions. And right before that is when we get the legitimate character interactions. And it's just like, sure, there is definitely some interactions during the musical number, but they didn't skimp out on the parts before and after the fact. Definitely not the lead up, and definitely not the part afterwards. And for that reason, it feels structured around its music. It feels like it's supporting the musical numbers instead of relying on them as a crutch to throw stuff in there. It's just, it's such a difficult thing to explain fully and perfectly. But what I can at least say is it feels like it's built around its music. And that leads as a nice transition into our next movie that is definitely built around its music as well, just in a very different way. Because the next movie we're talking about is also from Damien Chazelle, that being Whiplash. So stick around for that. 88.1 The Burg, your Music Central. Welcome back to What to Watch Wednesdays. And for our second movie on the watch list tonight, we will be taking a look at Whiplash from 2014, available to watch on Amazon Prime. This movie follows a college student by the name of Andrew Neiman who wants to be a really great jazz drummer. In pursuit of that goal, he ends up being put in the band run by the instructor Terrence Fletcher at his fictional conservatory, that being Schaefer Conservatory in New York City, where he ends up being somewhat accosted by Terrence Fletcher in pursuit of that dream of being a great jazz drummer. Essentially, well, not essentially, full-blown explicitly, Terrence Fletcher is an abusive and incredibly angry professor who is not necessarily concerned with being a nice and moral teacher, and more so about breaking people down quite literally in almost every sense of the word so that he can build them back up. And it's intense. It's very intense. It's not a happy movie to watch. I could make a joke about it being, oh, such a fun movie for the whole family to enjoy. But I couldn't lie about this movie if I tried. I was so tense the entire time watching it that it'd feel almost disrespectful to make a joke about it rather than a fun little poke. So I'm not even going to try. Whiplash is a movie that people have told me to watch many times before. They've said, oh, you've got to watch Whiplash. You'll love Whiplash. It's such a good movie. You'll understand it. Like you'll really get a kick out of it. It's just such a good film. And there are a lot of movies like that. People always say, oh, you have to watch this movie. You have to watch that movie. But Whiplash was one that I had been hearing pretty recently. And I figured I might as well bite the bullet. I'll watch Whiplash. I've seen the short film that kind of kicked off and was sort of the driving factor to the movie getting made in the first place. And I figured it's just, like, there's no reason for me to not watch it. If people keep saying it's a good movie and I like good movies, might as well give it a shot. With Whiplash, I think this is one of the few times where a movie has been hyped up so much to me and it meets practically every single expectation that I have going into it. I don't mean that to say that some movies that have been hyped up to me haven't lived up to their expectations before, but Whiplash just does it unabashedly. It just goes straight for the throat and goes, here's all of the expectations you have going into this. Here you go. Pow. Deal with it. That's exactly what it feels like it's saying directly to me. And I'll be honest, I absolutely love it for that reason. And I also have to wait a while before I can watch it again just for that reason alone. I think it's just, it's so cliche to say, but it's just good and it knows it's good. But to get into why it's good, we'd have to examine one of the most influential aspects of Whiplash, that being the acting. One of the biggest reasons that Whiplash has stood the test of time for the last 10 years, which arguably hasn't been a very long time, but has just permeated itself into the entire culture surrounding movies. The biggest reason for it is its acting. Mainly Miles Teller's performance, as Andrew Neiman, Miles Teller being an actor who I wasn't necessarily familiar with going into the movie, and I'm still not super familiar with after the movie, but I think his performance was definitely good. He showed pain, and he showed possible loss of humanity over the course of the movie, which is the entire point of it. But there's a reason that Miles Teller works. There's a reason that Andrew Neiman's character is defined by his actor. And it's from the character that directly opposes him and the actor that directly opposes him the entire time. That being Terrence Fletcher, played by J.K. Simmons. Terrence Fletcher is one of the greatest villain characters in any movie I've ever seen. Hands down, he is up there with Hannibal Lecter in terms of his presence on screen, his overall demeanor, the way he is performed by his actor. It just works and clicks in every single way possible. And it's horrifying. J.K. Simmons, I never expected to be so horrifying. It is intensely horrific how he conducts himself. It's almost just, it's so difficult to create the right words to describe just how plain and simply horrifying of a character Terrence is. Terrence Fletcher specifically just is in every scene that he is there. He just constantly pushes Miles Teller's character, Andrew Neiman, so far. He constantly pushes. He never lets up. It's upsetting the entire time, and you never know what he's going to do next. It is exactly like Hannibal Lecter in terms of being almost a full-blown psychopath, almost on that verge of just being an absolute monster of a person. And yet there is subtlety in the way he is performed and the way he is written for you to constantly think that he has a reason for doing all of this in his head, and it makes sense to him. That's how you write an antagonist. Hannibal Lecter's reasoning for doing a lot of the stuff that he did was, I can do it, and society is corrupt anyways, so I can do it. I believe that was what Hannibal Lecter believed. Correct me if I'm wrong, please do. But Fletcher's ideas come from a genuine place, and it just makes it all the more intense and heartbreaking and incredibly bittersweet to see how those ideas that had a genuine place got twisted into the crazy man that we see on screen, played by J.K. Simmons. It's such an interesting character to see come to life. And I could talk about Fletcher for so much longer. He really is the reason the movie's good in the first place. Like, I'll put it this way. I'll clear it up right now. I'll completely clear the air. This movie is a 10 out of 10 just for having Fletcher in it, okay? Just keep that in mind. Fletcher is the reason this movie's good, and everything else around it is also good. But Fletcher is the reason. And he's also the reason why it's so intense. He's the reason why it's a difficult watch. He's the reason that I just couldn't force myself to stop tensing my arm muscles the entire time. I think there was like a combined total of about 30 minutes throughout the movie where my arms weren't constantly tensing up and feeling like I was going to probably sprain something watching this movie. And the funniest thing out of all of it, as I've said, Andrew Neiman wants to be a jazz drummer. He wants to be a good drummer and then Terrence pushes him to do that. I've wanted to do drums myself for quite a while. And I figured there's a possibility after watching this that I won't want to do the drums anymore because of how incredibly upsetting the whole thing is. I want to be a drummer more in my life now after watching Whiplash than I think I ever did. That's how crazy it is. It again is bittersweet, but I can't go any further in detail than that. Just keep in mind that if you haven't seen Whiplash, I will turn into the very people who constantly told me to watch it and say, you got to watch Whiplash. It's got to be seen at some point. That's what I have to say about Whiplash. We will take another quick break, and when we come back, we will jump into the last movie on our watch list, that being Babylon. 88.1 The Burg, your Music Central. Welcome back to What to Watch Wednesdays. And for our last movie on the watch list tonight, we will be taking a look at Babylon from 2022, available to watch on Amazon Prime. This movie is about Hollywood in the 1920s and the 1930s eras, where they basically were just about to introduce sound into the world of movie making, and the time period directly after they introduced sound into the movie making era. It's essentially the same general concept as Singin' in the Rain, if you've ever seen that classic movie, but this time it's 3 hours long and it's a massive epic, and it covers the idea through about 4 to 5 central characters, or 3 to 4 if 3 to 4. It's more like 3 to 4, but still 3 hours long, very long period of time. And it also covers a lot of the depravity around that time period. It also is, it's also incredibly mediocre, and it's also, it's just so depraved. It's so very depraved. It's so incredibly suggestive. It's so incredibly pointless. And I don't think I can recommend the movie Babylon. And it's wild to think that somebody who made a movie like this directed the movie Whiplash. Isn't that a way to get whiplash, huh? Doesn't that give you whiplash? I'll stop with that joke. So I feel like the best way to kind of describe Babylon is to describe it in the same way that it presents itself, which is the overall premise of the thing, and then a bunch of stuff kind of happening mildly related to that overall premise for 3 hours. For me, it's going to be over the next, let's just say 6 minutes or so, where I give you the overall premise of my review, and then I'll just kind of say the stuff that I think about it. So just keep in mind that in the end, I don't think I'd recommend Babylon. It's not necessarily a good movie. It has good traits, but it doesn't necessarily deserve any high critical praise, and it didn't get any high critical praise. Definitely dropped down in comparison to some of Chazelle's other movies, and it's kind of that weird middle ground of people who either love the movie or hate it. And rather unfortunately, when it comes to things like that, I tend to be directly in the middle of it. I tend to never really love it or hate it as much as everybody else does. I tend to be in the middle of saying, well, these parts are good, but these parts aren't, and I don't really want to fault the entire movie or praise the entire movie for those reasons. So, with that being said, let me just go down the kind of random list here. This movie has Margot Robbie, Brad Pitt, and Diego Calva in it. You may be asking, who's Diego Calva? And I also asked that question. I was like, who's this? My answer was he's at least a decent actor, even in comparison to people like Margot Robbie and Brad Pitt. So good on him. I liked his character the most, I think, honestly, out of all the people. Like I could have really liked the Brad Pitt character, but I don't think he had a lot of purpose. He was just there to be drunk the entire time and then be really sad at the not conclusion of his story. I just was very surprised to see someone I'd never heard of before actually pull his weight against such heavy hitters like Margot Robbie and Brad Pitt, that it felt like it was worth noting. I also will say again, this movie is 3 hours long. That means it's an epic movie. It's a wide sort of spanning tale that takes multiple years to fully progress into where it ends up. And for that reason, you can't really relate the ending of the movie to how it started. Pretty much every epic movie I've seen is exactly like this. Things like Gone with the Wind, Fiddler on the Roof, the War and Peace movie. Like there are many epic movies out there. Lawrence of Arabia, I also remember that one. There are so many epic movies where no matter how good they are, it's always a weird dissonance of taking the start of the movie and comparing it to where it ends up. And that's just because when they're usually written well, they tend to have enough plot progression and character development over the course of those 3 hours that it makes it like because they've got so much longer than a standard movie length, they can really try to throw in a lot of character change. They can really change it up. And so what I'm trying to say is it's definitely intentional. It's just, again, a massive dissonance if you don't watch all the stuff in between it. Babylon feels like a movie that definitely has that same amount of dissonance to it, but it's not as prevalent as you'd expect. And I expected there to be more of it. And when it kind of popped into my head, it was like, oh, there's like 10 minutes left of the movie. Why is this happening now? That I should have been feeling this at like the 2-hour mark. And the fact that I'm not is only slightly concerning. But it's also, again, just worth mentioning. It's not necessarily a good or bad thing. But I could ramble on and on. But again, I think I should highlight the things that are good about Babylon. The good things are, hands down, the performances, the setting, the style, and the music. The music of Babylon is awesome. I love the music. All of it. All of it is good. I love the Babylon soundtrack, and I would highly recommend just listening to that. You don't need to see the movie like I thought I did. That is my full verdict on Babylon personally. I could listen to that soundtrack over and over again and never get tired of it. I haven't been listening to it over and over again. I've just been listening to one song, that being the song Voodoo Mama. That song is awesome. I love it. I love it so much, but all the other music is also great. I just love the music. And in comparison to that, the story and the pacing and the length of the movie and the suggestive nature of pretty much the first 30 minutes entirely drag the movie down significantly. And that's not something you really want to say about a movie, because the story and the pacing and the length are the things that people tend to notice the most. And I also notice them the most. And for that reason, again, I can't recommend Babylon really at all. I can't say that I hated the movie, but I can definitely say that out of a 3-hour experience of my life, the thing I remember was the music was great, the acting was good, and the story was just an empty husk of nothing that made me feel empty. That's not good for a 3-hour movie, guys. I don't know why I could possibly stand here and say that it's not a bad movie, but it doesn't feel that extreme. It doesn't feel like it's actively trying to be something and failing at it. It just feels so nothing that it ends up working its way around to maybe being something at some points and still being nothing by the end of it. So where does that leave me? It leaves me at the end. And all I can really say is thank you for listening in. I know this has been quite a different style here because these are 3 very unrelated movies, but keep in mind, quality over quantity is always appreciated in the film industry, and some of my favorite directors follow that rule. And Damien Chazelle isn't necessarily one of my favorite directors now, but I definitely love Whiplash a lot, and I understand why everybody loves Whiplash, so he's at least got that going for him. And La La Land is good too, and Babylon is something. It makes me question a lot of choices all the time. But I'll skip out on the analysis for now. Thank you all for listening in. Please follow What to Watch Wednesdays on Instagram at What to Watch Wednesdays, all one word, no caps, no spaces. I will be on What to Watch Weekends this Saturday at 9 a.m. I'm hoping to do some very interesting things on that show. Aside from talking about the 3 movies that we talked about today in depth a little bit more, it'll be a lot. I'm hoping it'll be a lot more chaotic and a lot more interesting. So please tune in. I can't give any spoilers. Please just tune in and find out. Thank you all again for listening in. This is Nathan signing off. This will be the last What to Watch Wednesdays of the quarter, so see you in fall.